Now, I think a very important point here, though, is, we're talking about does your explanation guide your intervention? And we're talking about one of the biggest explanations for why these kids behave this way is that they lack motivation. And I'm asking you to question whether that's the case. In other words, are we barking up the wrong therapeutic tree by trying to motivate these kids when something that's getting in their way may have nothing to do with motivation? But in addition to the question of whether this is well matched to what these kids are struggling with, I think we have to look at the side effects of motivational strategies, which is not something we do a lot of. If you think about them for a moment like you would think about a medicine, the first thing you're going to think about is, will it work? And I'm suggesting I'm not so sure these are going to work because I think they're poorly matched to what's getting in the kid's way in the first place. But now let's look at, well, what would the side effects be? And there's two major ones that I want to cover this morning. The first one has been well documented by research at this point. And that is that the more extrinsic motivation you apply to try to motivate a kid to do something, the less intrinsic motivation develops. In other words, the child actually loses their internal motivation to achieve that goal. So the more you rely on the carrot and the stick, the less the child develops internal motivation. They actually lose their internal motivation to meet the goal. So what's a concrete example of this? I had a family this school year that came to me, and they had a bunch of different concerns about their kid and the kid's challenging behavior. One of the top things on their list, which is perhaps one of the top things on everybody's list with a challenging kid in North America, was homework completion. The subject of many a battle in American homes. So homework completion was a big one for them, and they came to my office and they asked whether I thought this new system they had worked out would work. They said that he was obsessed with his PSP, the little portable game. And they said, and his homework completion was terrible the previous year and led to a dramatic drop in his grades. So what they said is, we've developed a system whereby we will track how often he completes his homework to a satisfactory degree, to have a log with the teachers so that they can get a sense of whether he's actually completing it sufficiently. And if he completes a sufficient number of homework assignments a month, he will qualify for a new PSP game each month, which is like a $40 or $45 purchase. So it's a pretty good deal, right? And he loves his PSP. And their question to me was, do you think it will work? Now, following the research, here was my answer. I do think it will work, which they were very happy about until I completed the sentence. I think this is what I said, will become much, much more interested in his PSP. And over time, less interested in the homework. The homework is just a vehicle to more PSP. And this has been well documented by research at this point. Now, what is one of the worst examples, by the way, of that, is if you're constantly using a carrot and stick approach to get a kid to do something, it's when you ask a kid to do something and they basically look at you and say, what are you going to give me? Which horrifies us adults, right? We're shocked. We feel like we're being held hostage. It is incredibly aggravating. And yet, I think we've got to stop and look in the mirror. In other words, where did the kid get this as their primary problem-solving strategy? I think it's a case of, generally speaking, you reap what you sow. Now, I have to say, though, that I am much more concerned about another side effect of motivational procedures, a more insidious one. And that is that the more you motivate somebody to try to do something, the more you are communicating in a not so subtle way that you think the reason that they're behaving this way is they're just not trying hard enough to not behave that way. It is inescapable. Every reward or consequence you send a kid's way is saying in so many words, you could do better if you just tried harder. Which I think is a very dangerous message to send a kid unless we're sure it's right. Because I think what happens over time is a phenomenon that I've come to call, if you give a dog a name, eventually they will answer to it. In other words, treat a kid like he doesn't care, like he's not trying hard enough. Don't be surprised when eventually he starts to look like and act like he doesn't care. And we do a lot of work with schools. I have to say, if I walk through any high school in North America during a transition period and the kids are all in the halls, you can spot the group of high schoolers huddled together who have sort of come to think of themselves as the we don't care kids. And again, I think we need to look at ourselves in the mirror, because I think from a very young age with challenging kids, we're actually teaching these kids that they don't care. With every motivator we send their way, we are suggesting that not caring enough is at least part of the problem. Last point here about motivational strategies is that I think it's a bit ironic that we spend a lot of time trying to motivate challenging kids to behave better. Because spending a lot of time with these kids, what do I observe? Who are the most motivated kids on the face of the earth to behave better? The only kids on the face of the earth who know what it's like to not behave well. In other words, I think these kids are already highly motivated. Why are they highly motivated? They don't want to be miserable. Right back to slide number 1. Kids do well if they can. If he could do well, he would do well. We've yet to meet the child that prefers doing poorly to doing well. Eventually, might they look like they don't care, they're not trying, they prefer doing poorly? Eventually, they might look that way, but they sure didn't start that way. Nobody prefers doing poorly to doing well. What we find is these kids are already highly motivated, and much more motivated than anything we could do to them is going to cause. Much more motivated by how miserable it is to be a very challenging kid.